D.B. Cooper is the name given to a notorious thief and hijacker who somehow managed to escape justice by jumping out of a Boeing 727, leaving the world with one of its biggest unsolved mysteries of the 70s. While the name D.B. Cooper is merely a media name given to an otherwise unidentified individual, he's gone down in history as a folk hero of sorts, even though he was and still is considered to be a wanted criminal. On November 24, 1971, Cooper hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. The aircraft was flying en route from Portland to Seattle, Washington. Cooper then extorted $200,000 in ransom money, equivalent to $1.4 million today. After releasing the plane's passengers in Seattle, Cooper asked to be flown to Reno, Nevada. Mid-flight, he parachuted out of the aircraft over southwestern Washington. No one knows whatever became of the man, known as D.B. Cooper, as he was never heard from again. In 1980, interest in the mystery was renewed when a small portion of the ransom cash was discovered along the banks of the Columbia River. While many hoped Cooper would be found and brought to justice, the mystery has only deepened over the years. During the first year of their investigation, the FBI developed several composite sketches of Cooper based on the eyewitness testimony of flight crew and passengers. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at a few suspects who looked just like those FBI sketches of D.B. Cooper. Ted Braden. Born in 1928, Theodore Burdett Braden Jr. served as a Special Forces commando during the Vietnam War. Braden was also a master skydiver and convicted felon. Within the Special Forces community, he was widely believed to be Cooper. He grew up in Ohio and joined the military in 1944 when he was 16. He went on to serve in the 101st Airborne Division during the Second World War. In time, he became one of the military's top parachutists, frequently representing the Army in international skydiving competitions. According to his military records, Braden made 911 jumps. Throughout the 60s, he was the team leader for a classified unit of Green Berets called the MACV-SOG. That unit conducted unconventional warfare operations during the Vietnam War. Braden also served as a military skydiving instructor, teaching members of Project Delta Halo jumping techniques. After 23 months in Vietnam, he deserted his unit in December of 1966. He made his way to the Congo, where he served briefly as a mercenary before being arrested by the CIA. He was taken back to the U.S. to face a court-martial. Although he committed a capital offense by deserting during wartime, he was given an honorable discharge. Even so, he was barred from re-enlisting in the military. In a profile piece published in Ramparts magazine in 1967, he was described by Special Forces vet and journalist Don Duncan as being someone who had some kind of secret death wish. Not only did he show disregard for military skydiving regulations, he was also involved in shady business dealings to make money. At the time of the hijacking, Braden was working as a truck driver in Vancouver, Washington, right across the Columbia River from Portland, Oregon. It's also known that in the early 70s, he was investigated by the FBI for his alleged involvement in stealing $250,000 in a trucking scam. He was never charged formally, but that detail is alarming. A couple years later, he was arrested in Pennsylvania for driving a stolen car with fake plates and no license. In the 80s, he was sent to federal prison for an unspecified crime. Given his history of covert operations in Vietnam, it's not unreasonable to assume he would have had the knowledge and ability to pull off a jump from a 727. While he was a bit shorter than the descriptions given of Cooper, Braden's other physical characteristics, including complexion, hair color, build, and age, all match those of the hijacker. He was never confirmed to be Cooper, and he died in 2007. Before we tell you more, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Kenneth Peter Christiansen. After watching a TV documentary about the Cooper hijacking in 2003, Minnesota resident Lyle Christiansen became convinced that his deceased brother Kenneth was the real D.B. Cooper. Lyle made several attempts, to no avail, to convince the FBI of his suspicions. He eventually reached out to author and film director Nora Ephron, with whom he helped make a film about the case. In 2010, a private investigator he reached out to in New York named Skip Porteous published a book theorizing that Christiansen was the hijacker. Kenneth enlisted in the Army in 1944. He was then trained as a paratrooper. By the time he was deployed in 1945, World War II had already ended, but he made a few training jumps while stationed in Japan in the late 40s. After being discharged from the Army, Kenneth got a job as a mechanic with Northwest Orient in 1954. He later worked as a flight attendant and a purser for the airline. Kenneth would have been 45 at the time of the hijacking. Like Braden, he too was a bit shorter than the description of Cooper. He was also thinner and had a lighter complexion complexion than what eyewitnesses described. However, he did smoke, just like Cooper did, and was particularly fond of bourbon, the drink Cooper requested during the hijacking. Jack Coffelt. This suspect was a convicted con man and purported government informant who once claimed to have been the confidant and chauffeur of Abe Lincoln's great-grandson Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith. In 1972, Coffelt started claiming he was Cooper. He even attempted to use one of his former prison cellmates as an intermediary to sell his story to a Hollywood film production company. He claimed that after parachuting out of the 727, he landed near Mount Hood. In the process, he claimed to have injured himself and lost the ransom money. It's true that photos of Coffelt bear a striking resemblance to the composite sketches of Cooper, but instead of being in his 40s at the time, as eyewitnesses estimated the hijacker to be, Coffelt was already in his 50s. On the day of the hijacking, Coffelt was known to have been in Portland. According to those who knew him, he also suffered mysterious leg injuries that would have been consistent with a skydiving mishap. That said, the FBI concluded his story was a fabrication, as his version of events differed in numerous details with info they had that had not yet been made public. Lynn Doyle Cooper. L.D. Cooper was a Korean War vet and leather worker who was first proposed as a suspect in July of 2011 by his niece Maria Cooper. According to Maria, when she was 8 years old, she overheard L.D. and another of her uncles planning something she described as very mischievous, involving the use of expensive walkie-talkies. She claimed she listened in on this conversation while staying at her grandmother's house in Sisters, Oregon, about 150 miles from Portland. The following day, Flight 305 was hijacked. While Maria's uncles claimed they'd been out turkey hunting, when they returned home, L.D. Cooper was wearing a bloody shirt. He claimed he'd been involved in an automobile accident, but Maria's parents later came to believe he was actually the hijacker. L.D. died in 1999, but Maria said he was long obsessed with a Canadian comic book hero known as Dan Cooper. He apparently had one of those comic books tacked onto his wall as well. But he was not a trained skydiver nor paratrooper. The FBI concluded his DNA did not match that of the partial DNA profile they had obtained from the hijacker's tie. Barbara Dayton. Born Robert Dayton in 1926, this suspect was a recreational pilot and librarian for the University of Washington. Before undergoing a gender confirmation surgery in 1969, Dayton had served in the U.S. Merchant Marines and later the Army in World War II. After transitioning and changing her name to Barbara, she claimed she had staged the Cooper hijacking. The supposed reason why she carried out the hijacking was to get back at the airline and the FAA, whose rules had prevented her from becoming a pilot. When asked what happened to the ransom money, Dayton claimed she had hid it in a cistern near Woodburn, Oregon, a suburb of Portland. Eventually, however, Dayton recanted her story after being informed that hijacking charges could still be brought against her. The FBI never seemed to consider Dayton a serious suspect, and she passed away in 2002. Now it's time to hear from you. Who do you think was most likely the real DB Cooper? Let us know in the comment section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.